My name is Dean Anderson, 67 years old, and I never thought I'd see the day when the house I built with my own two hands would become the place I was thrown out of. When my daughter Sarah passed away last month after her battle with cancer, I thought grief was the worst pain I'd experience. I was wrong. Standing on the sidewalk, watching my son-in-law James throw my bags into the street, I realized some wounds cut deeper than loss. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments and subscribe as I share how an envelope changed everything. I spent my entire career as a civil engineer, building structures that would stand the test of time. Nothing made me prouder than the house I constructed for my family 30 years ago in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania. Every beam, every floorboard, every detail was installed with my own hands. The craftsman-style home with its wraparound porch, detailed woodwork, and spacious backyard garden was my masterpiece. My late wife Margaret and I designed it together, creating the perfect place to raise our only daughter, Sarah. Margaret passed from breast cancer 10 years ago, leaving Sarah and me to lean on each other. The bond between us grew even stronger after her mother's death. I supported Sarah through college and the early years of her nursing career, and she checked on me daily, making sure I wasn't drowning in loneliness. When Sarah met James Walker at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse, I was cautiously optimistic. He was 34 to her 26, worked in finance, and carried himself with confidence. Sarah seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to me. They dated for 2 years before he proposed, and though something about him never quite sat right with me, I kept my concerns to myself. My daughter was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. For their wedding gift 5 years ago, I signed over the deed to our family home to Sarah. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I wanted her to have security, a place that would always be hers. What James never knew was that Sarah and I had visited Frank Thomas, my old college friend and retired attorney, who helped us include special provisions in the property transfer. Sarah insisted on these safeguards, saying, "Just in case, Dad. Not that we'll ever need them." After the wedding, I moved into a small apartment about 15 minutes away, giving the newlyweds space to build their life together. I visited regularly for Sunday dinners, holidays, and occasional help with home maintenance. James always seemed somewhat uncomfortable with my presence, though he masked it well in front of Sarah. 3 years into their marriage, Sarah called me with news that shattered our world. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "the doctors found something. Lymphoma. It's aggressive." Without hesitation, I offered to move back to help care for her. James initially objected, claiming they could handle it themselves, but Sarah insisted. 2 days later, I was back in the house I built, this time in the guest bedroom. The early tensions with James were subtle. He would sigh loudly when I asked questions about Sarah's treatment plan. He'd mutter under his breath when I prepared Sarah's favorite foods. He seemed resentful of the special bond Sarah and I shared, especially when she would ask for my company during her long chemotherapy sessions instead of his. During that year before Sarah's condition worsened, I often found myself walking through the house late at night, remembering the life we'd built there. In the living room, I could still see 5-year-old Sarah learning to tie her shoes. In the kitchen, I remembered teaching teenage Sarah to make her mother's lasagna recipe. Every corner held memories of family gatherings, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings. Our neighbors, many who had lived on the street as long as we had, frequently stopped by with homemade meals and offers of support. They respected our family and often told Sarah how lucky she was to have me around. These comments only seemed to aggravate James further. As Sarah's medical bills mounted, I quietly liquidated a significant portion of my retirement savings. When James complained about the financial strain, I offered to contribute. His pride seemed wounded by this, and he reluctantly accepted only when the alternative was taking out a second mortgage. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. The way James would check his phone constantly during Sarah's hospital stays, how he started coming home later and later, claiming work pressure, the lingering scent of alcohol on his breath when he did return. the growing distance between them that Sarah tried to hide from me with forced smiles. But I was so focused on my daughter's health that I missed what was happening to her marriage. As treatments failed one after another, Sarah grew weaker. Her once vibrant blue eyes, so like her mother's, became shadowed with pain, and something else I couldn't quite identify. During her final months, I became her primary caregiver while James was increasingly absent from our lives. The hospice nurse started coming daily during Sarah's final weeks. I rarely left her side, sleeping in the armchair beside her bed, holding her hand through the long nights when pain kept her awake. James made appearances before heading to work, but the loving husband act dropped away as soon as he thought I wasn't looking. 3 days before she left us, Sarah had a moment of startling clarity. The morphine haze lifted, and she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "promise me you'll stay in the house." "Sarah, honey, this is your and James's home now," I replied, smoothing her thinning hair. Her eyes flashed with unusual urgency. "No. Promise me. The papers. Frank has them. Promise me, Dad." Not understanding, but unwilling to upset her, I nodded. "I promise, sweetheart." She seemed satisfied and drifted back to sleep. When I mentioned the conversation to James later, he stared at me blankly before muttering something about medication confusion. Sarah passed peacefully in her sleep the following Saturday morning. I was holding her hand. James was asleep in their bedroom down the hall. The funeral was a blur of faces and platitudes. James played the part of devastated husband flawlessly, accepting condolences with a stoic expression and appropriately timed breakdowns. Several of Sarah's colleagues commented on what a loving couple they had been and how devoted James was. I nearly choked on the irony. The change in James began almost immediately after the funeral. It started small: a cold glance, a slammed door, an offhand comment about moving forward. Within days, I found empty liquor bottles in the recycling bin and overheard heated arguments on his phone late at night. One morning, I noticed several of Sarah's photos missing from the mantel. When questioned, James shrugged. "It's too painful to see them everywhere," he said, though his eyes showed no pain at all. I tried maintaining Sarah's beloved garden as a way to feel connected to her memory. James criticized my efforts, complaining about water bills and saying the yard looked obsessive and stuck in the past. Our first major argument erupted 2 weeks after the funeral, when I discovered James packing Sarah's clothes into donation boxes. "What are you doing?" I demanded, pulling a handmade sweater from the box. "It's only been 2 weeks. "Life goes on, Dean," he snapped. "The closet needs clearing out. Sarah would understand." "Sarah isn't here to understand, because you couldn't be bothered to be by her side when she needed you most." I shot back, immediately regretting my words, but unable to contain my anger. His face hardened. "This is my house now. I decide what happens to her things." After that confrontation, things deteriorated rapidly. James began inviting friends over for what he called small gatherings that quickly became loud, drunken parties. The disrespect to Sarah's memory was palpable, as strangers laughed and spilled drinks on the furniture she had carefully chosen. 6 weeks after the funeral, I accidentally saw a text on James's phone when it lit up on the kitchen counter. "Miss you, babe. Tonight." From someone named Tiffany. My stomach churned with disgust. Sure enough, Tiffany started visiting regularly. She was a blonde woman in her mid-30s with acrylic nails that clicked incessantly against her phone screen and a high-pitched laugh that grated on my nerves. She would glance at me with poorly concealed disdain whenever our paths crossed. James began complaining loudly about mortgage payments, despite my previous financial contributions and offers to help further. When I suggested using more of my savings to ease the burden, he dismissed me with surprising hostility. Our neighbors, particularly the Johnsons who lived next door for 25 years, started expressing concern. "Dean, is everything all right over there? Mrs.?" Johnson asked one afternoon as I collected the mail. "We've been hearing a lot of disturbances lately." I forced a smile and made excuses, unwilling to air our family's dirty laundry. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Something was seriously wrong with James. I noticed my medication and personal items had been moved from the guest bathroom to a small cabinet in the hallway. When questioned, James claimed he needed the storage space. The following week, I found my clothes had been relocated to the smallest bedroom, formerly used for storage. James's comments grew increasingly pointed. "Have you thought about finding your own place soon?" he asked over breakfast one morning. "You must miss your independence." "Sarah wanted me to stay," I reminded him gently. His smile never reached his eyes. "Sarah wanted a lot of things she can't have anymore." My isolation grew as James began controlling who could visit the house. When my friend Frank called to say he'd stopped by but no one answered, I was confused. I'd been home all day. James later admitted he'd seen Frank at the door, but didn't think I was up for visitors. I felt like a stranger in the home I had built with my own hands. The situation reached a breaking point when James formally introduced Tiffany as his girlfriend, just 6 weeks after Sarah's death. He brought her to Sunday dinner, his arm draped possessively around her waist. "Dean, you remember Tiffany," he said casually, as though introducing an old friend rather than the woman he was sleeping with while my daughter's memory was still fresh in the house. Tiffany was everything Sarah wasn't. Loud, materialistic, and oblivious to the feelings of others. Her bleached blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her outfit was inappropriately revealing for a family dinner. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she reached for her wine glass. "So nice to finally meet you properly," she said with a saccharine smile. "James has told me so much." Throughout dinner, she complained about the outdated decor that Sarah had lovingly chosen and made thinly veiled comments about the old man cramping their style. James laughed at her remarks instead of defending me or his late wife's memory. The following weekend, I returned from grocery shopping to find them redecorating the living room. Family photos had been removed, replaced by generic artwork from a department store. Sarah's handcrafted quilt was gone from the back of the sofa, a garish throw pillow in its place. "Where are the family photos?" I asked, setting down my grocery bags. "We needed a fresh start," James replied without looking up from the wall where he was hanging a mass-produced canvas print. That evening, I discovered Sarah's personal journal missing from her bedside table, where I'd kept it since her passing. When I confronted James, his reaction was explosive. "Stop living in the past," he shouted, face reddening. "That journal is private anyway. You shouldn't be reading it. It contains her thoughts, her memories," I argued. "It's one of the few connections I have left to my daughter." "Your daughter is dead," he said coldly. "And the sooner you accept that and move on, the better for everyone." I stood there, stunned by his cruelty. Behind him, Tiffany smirked, examining her manicure with exaggerated disinterest. Later that week, I overheard Tiffany suggesting they convert my room into a home gym. "He doesn't need that much space anyway," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "My grandmother lives in a retirement community with half that square footage." I began finding my belongings relocated to the basement without my permission. Books I was reading would disappear from my nightstand. Photos I'd placed on my dresser would end up in drawers. It was a subtle form of erasure, as though they were trying to remove all evidence of my existence from the main house. James changed the locks on the home office where important documents were kept, claiming he needed privacy for work. When I mentioned needing access to some papers stored there, he dismissed me, saying he'd look for them when he had time. During a particularly heated argument about household expenses, I attempted to discuss the legal ownership of the house. "This house was a gift to Sarah," I explained calmly. "There were special provisions in the property transfer." James laughed dismissively. "Nice try, old man. I was her husband. Everything that was hers is legally mine now. Check with any lawyer." "That's not entirely accurate," I began, but he cut me off. "Look, I've been patient with you out of respect for Sarah, but my patience is running thin. This is my house now. You're a guest. Remember that." Tiffany's presence became increasingly intrusive. She made comments about nursing homes for people who can't take care of themselves, while pointedly looking in my direction. She complained about my early morning routine disrupting their sleep, despite the fact that I was deliberately quiet. The final straw came when I found several of Sarah's most cherished items in the trash bin outside, including the handmade quilt her mother had created during her own cancer treatment. I rescued the items, cradling the quilt to my chest as tears streamed down my face. The deliberate cruelty of the act was overwhelming. James began controlling all household finances, including utilities I had offered to pay. He claimed the cable bill was too expensive and canceled it, knowing I enjoyed watching baseball games in the evenings. The Wi-Fi password was changed weekly, limiting my access to contact with the outside world. I noticed neighbors watching our interactions with concern, but no one intervened. Once, Mr. Johnson from next door approached after witnessing James berating me on the front lawn for embarrassing him by chatting with the mail carrier for too long. Mr. Pardis. Johnson asked if everything was all right, but with James standing there, arms crossed and glaring, I forced a smile and assured him all was fine. My health began to suffer. I developed insomnia, lying awake listening to James and Tiffany's loud laughter downstairs. My appetite decreased, and I lost 15 pounds in just over a month. My hands shook slightly when James raised his voice, a physical manifestation of constant anxiety. James began leaving passive-aggressive notes around the house. "Please clean up after yourself" appeared on the spotless counter after I made breakfast. Utility costs rising. "Shorter showers, please" was taped to the bathroom mirror, despite my careful conservation of water. Desperate for advice, I managed to contact Frank Thomas, explaining the situation in a hushed phone call from the backyard while James and Tiffany were out. Frank expressed immediate concern and promised to look into the property documents, suggesting we meet soon. Before I could meet with Frank, I discovered James had been intercepting my mail. A bank statement and Social Security letter were found hidden beneath magazines in the recycling bin. When confronted, James claimed they must have been misplaced accidentally. Tiffany moved in permanently, taking over the master bedroom that Sarah and James had shared. I overheard her complaining about Sarah's boring taste as they replaced the bedding and curtains my daughter had selected. Their laughter echoed through the house as they discarded more of her possessions. I was gradually confined to the smallest room in the house, the former storage space barely large enough for a twin bed and small dresser. My world was shrinking, my daughter's memory being systematically erased, and I felt powerless to stop it. The morning of the eviction dawned gray and drizzly, appropriate for what would become the worst day of my life since Sarah's passing. I had gone out early to pick up groceries, including ingredients for a soup recipe Sarah had loved. Perhaps it was a naive attempt to bring some peace to our increasingly hostile household. As I turned onto our street, brown paper bag clutched against my chest to shield it from the light rain, I noticed a disturbance in front of our house. From a distance, it looked like someone had dumped trash across our meticulously maintained front lawn. As I drew closer, my heart began to race. Those weren't trash bags. They were my suitcases and boxes of personal belongings, getting soaked in the steadily increasing rainfall. Neighbors peeked through windows and cracked doors, witnessing the spectacle but remaining safely distant. Mrs. Peterson from across the street quickly pulled her curtains shut when I glanced in her direction. The Johnsons stood on their porch, whispering to each other but making no move to help. James stood in the doorway of my home, my house, blocking the entrance with his body. Even from the sidewalk, I could see his eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. A half-empty tumbler of amber liquid dangled from his fingers despite the early hour. Behind him, partially hidden in the shadows of the foyer, Tiffany recorded the scene on her phone, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "James," I called, quickening my pace, grocery bag clutched tightly. "What's happening? Why are my things outside?" "Your stay is over, Dean." His words were slightly slurred, but his tone was ice cold. "I've had enough of your hovering, your judging, your constant presence reminding me of everything I've lost." "This is my home," I protested, dropping the groceries on the sidewalk and rushing toward the porch. "Sarah wanted me here. You know that." He laughed, a harsh sound, nothing like the polite chuckle he'd once used around my daughter. "This isn't your home anymore." He waved a document in my face. Property deed. My name, not yours. There were provisions, I began, reaching for the document, but he yanked it away. You useless old man, he spat, voice rising to a shout that echoed down the quiet street. Sarah's gone. She's not coming back, and I'm done playing caretaker to her father. You've been nothing but a burden, a reminder, a ghost I never wanted. I stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, rain now soaking through my light jacket. Please, James, be reasonable. At least let me get my medications and important papers. Your garbage is on the lawn, he snarled, gesturing wildly with the hand holding the tumbler, liquor sloshing over the rim. Take it, and go live with the beggars where you belong. Behind him, Tiffany's giggle recorded for posterity. Make sure you get his face, babe, James called over his shoulder, when he realizes he has nowhere to go. I tried once more to approach the door, desperation giving me courage. James, please. There are irreplaceable photos of Margaret and Sarah in there. Please, just let me. He responded by throwing more of my belongings onto the wet lawn. Books, clothing, a small box of keepsakes I'd managed to hold on to. The box burst open upon impact, scattering precious family photos across the muddy grass. I watched in horror as rain droplets began to dissolve decades of memories preserved in fragile paper and ink. Frantically, I knelt in the mud, trying to gather the photos before they were completely ruined. My hands trembled as I collected a water-damaged image of Sarah's 5th birthday, Margaret's smile now bleeding blue into the white background. I have legal rights, I called out, my voice breaking. Sarah and I had an agreement about this house. James descended the steps, towering over me as I knelt in the mud. He snatched a document I was trying to show him from my hands and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter away in the wind. Your legal rights, he sneered, tossing the remaining scraps at my feet. Tiffany had emerged onto the porch now, phone still recording. Pathetic, she commented loudly. Can't even stand up for himself. No wonder his daughter didn't leave him the house. I felt something break inside me at her casual cruelty, at the mockery of my relationship with Sarah. Physical pain radiated through my chest, as though my heart was literally tearing. Mr. Johnson finally approached from next door, cordless phone in hand. I've called the police, he announced, looking uncomfortable but determined. This isn't right, James. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, I was still gathering my soaked belongings, now shivering in the steady rain. The young officer spoke briefly with James, then approached me with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, sir, but this appears to be a civil matter. The property deed is in Mr. Walker's name, and he has the legal right to determine who lives in his home. But there were special provisions, I tried to explain, teeth chattering from cold and shock. My daughter and I arranged. You'll need to take that up with an attorney, sir, the officer interrupted gently. We can't intervene in property disputes without court orders. Do you have somewhere you can go tonight? The reality crashed down on me like the relentless rain. I had nowhere to go. My apartment had been rented to someone else years ago when I moved back to care for Sarah. Most of my savings had gone toward her medical treatments. My friends were mostly gone or in assisted living facilities themselves. I'm not sure, I admitted, humiliation burning despite the chill soaking into my bones. The officer looked genuinely concerned. There's a shelter downtown that might have space, or I could call Adult Protective Services. He doesn't need handouts, came a firm voice from behind us. Anna Chen, owner of the coffee shop 2 blocks away, stood under a large umbrella, determination on her face. Mr. Anderson built half the houses in this neighborhood, including mine. He can stay in my guest room tonight. As Anna helped me gather what remained of my belongings, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The stress, the shock, the cold rain. It was too much. My knees buckled, and the last thing I saw before consciousness faded was James, watching impassively from the porch, tumbler raised in a mock toast to my collapse. I woke in a hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily beside me. The doctor explained I'd suffered an anxiety attack, compounded by mild hypothermia and exhaustion. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation due to my age and recent stress. Alone in the sterile room that night, surrounded by the salvaged remnants of my life in plastic hospital bags, I stared at the ceiling and contemplated how thoroughly I had failed. Failed to protect Sarah from a man who clearly never loved her the way she deserved. Failed to honor my promise to stay in the house. Failed even to save the precious photos that were our family's only tangible memories. For one dark moment, I considered whether there was any point in continuing. What did I have left? My daughter gone, my home taken, my dignity stripped away on a public street while neighbors watched. Then my hand brushed against something in the hospital bed, a folded note that had fallen from my wallet during the nurse's inventory of my belongings. In Sarah's handwriting, "Dad, your strength taught me how to be brave. I love you always." It wasn't much, but it was enough to get through the night. The following morning, Anna arrived at the hospital with a change of clothes and her brother Michael, who offered to drive us to his home after my discharge. "The guest room is small," Michael apologized, "but it's yours as long as you need it." Their kindness was overwhelming after James's cruelty. I struggled to express my gratitude through the lump in my throat. Once settled in Michael's comfortable guest room, I finally called Frank Thomas. My hands shook as I dialed, shame and anxiety making it difficult to speak clearly. "Dean." Frank's concerned voice came through the line. "I've been trying to reach you for days. What's happened?" I explained the situation in halting sentences, each word painful to pronounce. The eviction, the destruction of personal property, the public humiliation. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face, and I was grateful Frank couldn't see them. There was a long pause before Frank spoke again, his voice unusually serious. "Dean, do you remember when Sarah came to see me about 3 months before she passed?" "Vaguely," I admitted. "She mentioned paperwork but wouldn't explain details." "Sarah was smarter than all of us," Frank said, a note of pride in his voice. "She saw this coming, Dean. She anticipated James might change after she was gone." A flash of memory, Sarah's pale face, her urgent grip on my hand. "The papers. Frank has them." "What exactly did she do?" I asked, hope flickering faintly for the first time in days. "I need to check my files to be certain." But Sarah created what I can only describe as a legal trapdoor. She suspected James might try to force you out eventually, and she made provisions for that exact scenario. Frank explained he needed to retrieve documents from his office safe and suggested we meet the following day. "In the meantime," he added, "search through whatever belongings you managed to save. Sarah mentioned hiding a letter for you somewhere only you would think to look." After the call ended, I carefully sorted through the pitiful collection of water-damaged possessions Michael had helped me bring from the hospital. Most items were ruined beyond recovery, but in the breast pocket of my old tweed jacket, the one I'd worn to Sarah's college graduation, I found an envelope, miraculously protected from the rain. Inside was a letter in Sarah's handwriting, dated just weeks before her death. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, I was right about James. And I'm so sorry. I saw the changes in him during my illness, the resentment, the distance, the coldness. He thought I didn't notice when pain medication made me drift off. You deserved better than to be treated as an obligation, and I fear that without me there to intervene, James will show his true colors. I've spoken with Frank about legal protections for both you and our family home. Trust him, and know that I made arrangements to ensure you'll be taken care of. All my love, Sarah." I read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh tears but also a growing sense of my daughter's foresight and love. Even in her final months, weakened by disease and medication, she had been protecting me. The following afternoon, Frank arrived at Michael's house with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. His expression was grimly satisfied as he spread documents across the kitchen table. "Sarah came to me with concerns about James long before most people would have noticed anything wrong," Frank explained, pointing to a document dated nearly a year before her death. "She said he'd become different during her illness, withdrawn, resentful, frequently absent. She was worried about you." "I suspected something was off," I admitted. but I thought it was just his way of dealing with grief. Frank shook his head. Sarah was more perceptive. She created a specialized amendment to the property deed with very specific language. The house was indeed transferred to her name, with James as beneficiary upon her death under normal circumstances. Under normal circumstances? I repeated. Frank smiled for the first time. Here's where it gets interesting. Sarah included a condition stating that if you were ever evicted or forced to leave against your will, the property ownership would immediately revert to you in full. The mechanism was triggered the moment James threw you out. I stared at him, struggling to comprehend. You mean? I mean James just handed you back your house by kicking you out of it, Frank said triumphantly. Sarah created the perfect trap, and he walked right into it. Legally, the house is yours again, Dean. The revelation was stunning. My brilliant, beautiful daughter had anticipated this betrayal and silently arranged protection. Frank advised gathering evidence of the eviction, photographs of my belongings on the lawn, statements from witnesses, medical records from my hospital stay. Anna volunteered to contact neighbors who had seen the incident. Over the next week, I slowly regained physical strength while Frank built our legal case. Michael drove me past the house occasionally, and we noticed disturbing changes. A for sale sign appeared in the front yard. Strange cars came and went at all hours. Through neighborhood gossip, we learned James was selling off furniture and appliances. Anna connected me with a support group for widowed parents that met at her coffee shop. Sharing my story with others who understood loss was cathartic. A retired detective in the group suggested investigating James's financial situation, suspecting the hasty sale might indicate money troubles. Frank's paralegal discovered James had taken out a second mortgage on the house 3 months after Sarah's death, a transaction that required forging documents since he lacked the legal authority to do so. Further investigation revealed significant gambling debts and credit card accounts opened in Sarah's name posthumously. Identity theft and mortgage fraud, Frank said, shaking his head. He's looking at potential criminal charges on top of losing the house. As we prepared for the confrontation, I spent hours reflecting on the signs I'd missed about James's character. The occasional cold glance when Sarah wasn't looking. The unexplained absences during her treatment. The phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. I had been so focused on caring for my daughter that I'd overlooked the darkness growing in her husband. 2 weeks after the eviction, while sorting through a box of books Anna had rescued from the lawn, I discovered Sarah's original will hidden inside her favorite novel, the one I'd read to her during long hospital nights. The document confirmed Frank's explanation and included a personal message that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Dad, home is where you built our lives. It should always be yours. 3 weeks after the eviction, our preparation was complete. Frank had filed all necessary documents with the county clerk and secured a court official to accompany us. We arrived at the house unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, 3 cars pulling up simultaneously. Frank's sedan, the court official's government vehicle, and Michael's truck with me, in the passenger seat. The scene that greeted us was surreal. Music blared from open windows. A dozen luxury cars lined the street. A large open house banner hung beside the for sale sign in the front yard. Through the windows, I could see people with wine glasses wandering through my home, examining walls and fixtures like shoppers at a department store. We approached the front door, which stood open to welcome potential buyers. Frank led our small procession, briefcase in hand, expression determined. The court official, a stern woman in her 50s, followed with an air of authority. Michael stayed beside me, his steady presence keeping me grounded. James spotted us from the living room, where he was gesturing enthusiastically to a middle-aged couple about the excellent craftsmanship. His animated sales pitch died mid-sentence. The color drained from his face, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he recognized Frank beside me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, hurrying to block our entry. "This is a private event. You can't just barge in." "Actually, Mr. Walker," the court official interjected smoothly, presenting her credentials, I'm here on official business regarding the property at 1542 Maple Avenue. I need to speak with you immediately." Tiffany appeared behind James, champagne flute in hand, wearing a dress that seemed inappropriate for a real estate showing. "What's going on?" she asked, eyeing our group suspiciously. James forced a laugh, aware of the potential buyers watching with interest. "Some misunderstanding. Let me handle this outside." Once on the porch, Frank took control of the conversation. "Mr. Walker, I'm representing Dean Anderson in this matter. I have here the original deed transfer with special provisions created by Sarah Anderson Walker prior to her death." He presented the documents, pointing to specific paragraphs as he explained. "As you can see, Section 4 clearly states that in the event Dean Anderson is evicted or forced to leave the premises against his will, full ownership of the property immediately reverts to him." James snatched the papers, scanning them with increasing agitation. "This is ridiculous. It can't be legal." "I was her husband. It's completely legal," the court official confirmed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I've reviewed all documentation thoroughly. The provision was properly notarized and filed with the county. By forcibly removing Mr. Anderson from the property on May 12th, you activated the reversal clause. This house belongs to Dean Anderson now," Frank concluded firmly. "Additionally, the second mortgage you obtained was fraudulent since you lacked legal authority to encumber the property." James's face contorted with rage and panic. "No! This is my house. Sarah left it to me." "Sarah left it to you conditionally," I said quietly, finding my voice at last. "She knew you better than any of us, it seems." Tiffany's expression had changed dramatically as she overheard the conversation. She took a step back from James, clutching her champagne flute like a shield. "You told me the house was fully yours," she accused. "You said there wouldn't be any problems with the sale." "There won't be," James insisted desperately. "This is just a misunderstanding. I wasn't thinking clearly when Dean left. I was grieving. We all were." "Grief doesn't turn people cruel," I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "It reveals character." James changed tactics, his tone becoming pleading. "Dean, be reasonable. I loved Sarah. I was under tremendous stress. We can work something out. You can move back in. We'll forget this happened." Frank intervened before I could respond. "The legal situation is non-negotiable, Mr. Walker. Furthermore, our investigation has uncovered evidence of mortgage fraud and identity theft that has been forwarded to the district attorney's office." The mention of potential criminal charges seemed to finally penetrate James's denial. His shoulders slumped as the court official handed him formal documents confirming the property transfer. "You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from the premises," she stated. "Any items belonging to Sarah Anderson or Dean Anderson must remain in the house." Tiffany was already backing toward the door. "You told me this house was yours to sell," she hissed at James. "You said we'd split the money and move to Florida." Without waiting for his response, she pushed past him and announced loudly to the gathered potential buyers, "Show's over. No sale today." As the confused guests began filtering out, James made one last desperate attempt. "I was her husband," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I loved Sarah. This isn't fair." "Did you?" I asked softly. "Because I found her journal, James. The one you tried to hide from me. I read about the nights she lay awake while you were out working late. I read about the text messages she discovered, the receipts for gifts never given to her. I read about her fear that you stayed only for the house and what you might inherit." His face crumpled, not with genuine grief but with the realization that his scheme had failed spectacularly. "You can't prove any of that," he muttered. But the fight had gone out of him. "I don't need to," I replied. "Sarah already did, with that provision in the deed. She knew exactly who you were, James. She just loved you enough to hope she was wrong." 2 days later, I stood on the porch watching as James loaded the last of his belongings into a rented truck. The neighbors who had once averted their eyes now watched openly, the story having spread throughout the community. James worked silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As he prepared to leave, I approached him one last time, Sarah's wedding ring in my palm. "This belongs to you," I said, extending my hand. "It's the only thing of hers that was truly yours." He stared at the ring, then at me, something unreadable flickering across his face. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed genuine regret in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the hardness I'd come to recognize. "Keep it," he said flatly, turning away. "It's worthless to me now." As his truck disappeared down the street, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a profound sadness that my daughter had married a man capable of such callousness. I wondered what signs I had missed during their courtship, what warnings I should have heeded. Back inside the house, I carefully opened the envelope Sarah had prepared with Frank, the same envelope that had triggered the legal trap when James evicted me. Inside was not only the property documents, but a letter addressed to James, dated a week before her death. "James, if you're reading this, you've made a terrible mistake. I prayed you would prove me wrong, that the man I fell in love with would return once I was gone. I hoped you would care for my father, as you promised me you would. But if you're seeing these papers, you chose differently. Know that I forgive you, but I could not leave my father vulnerable to the coldness I glimpsed in you during my illness. The house was always his, built with his hands and filled with our family's love. It was never yours to take, Sarah. Reclaiming the house was only the beginning of a long healing process. The physical structure remained, but James and Tiffany had altered it significantly during their brief reign. I spent weeks restoring what I could, carefully rehanging family photographs, repainting walls they had changed, replacing furniture they had sold. Anna continued to visit regularly, helping me organize and clean. Her steady presence and practical approach to problems kept me grounded when grief threatened to overwhelm me. Through her, I reconnected with neighbors who expressed genuine remorse for not intervening during the eviction. "We should have done something," Mrs. Johnson admitted, bringing over a homemade casserole as a peace offering. "We were afraid of getting involved, but that's no excuse." The hardest part was finding evidence of how thoroughly James had disrespected Sarah's memory. Hidden in closets and under furniture were empty liquor bottles, cigarette burns on wood surfaces, and even dating app receipts dated just weeks after her funeral. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but also confirmation that Sarah's protection had been necessary and justified. Frank visited regularly, becoming the friend I needed during those difficult months. He helped me understand the legal aftermath of James's actions. The mortgage fraud investigation was proceeding, with James facing potential criminal charges. The bank that had processed the fraudulent loan was pursuing him for repayment. "Sarah would be pleased with how things turned out," Frank commented one evening as we sat on the porch. "She was always the smartest person in any room." "I should have seen through him from the beginning," I replied, the familiar guilt surfacing again. Frank shook his head firmly. "Manipulators like James are experts at presenting what people want to see. Sarah saw his true colors eventually, and she took steps to protect you. That's what matters." As I settled back into life in my home, I began discovering small treasures Sarah had hidden throughout the house, memory boxes tucked away in unexpected places. Under a loose floorboard in her childhood bedroom, I found a collection of Father's Day cards she'd made over the years. Behind the furnace in the basement was a waterproof container holding recordings she'd made during her final months, messages of love and memories she wanted preserved. The most meaningful discovery came 6 months after reclaiming the house. While replanting Sarah's garden, which had been neglected during James's tenure, I unearthed a sealed mason jar containing seeds and a note. "Dad, plant these in spring. Life continuous, even after loss. Love always. S." The garden became my therapy. I created a memorial section using Sarah's favorite flowers: purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and lavender. Tending to the living plants connected me to both Sarah and Margaret, who had first designed the garden layout decades ago. My support group became an unexpected source of purpose. When another member mentioned having nowhere to hold a memorial for his late son, I offered my garden. Soon, my home became an informal gathering place for those navigating grief, a safe space where painful emotions could be expressed without judgment. Approximately 8 months after the eviction, I encountered James unexpectedly at the grocery store. He looked disheveled, his designer clothes replaced by wrinkled bargain store items. According to local gossip, the mortgage fraud investigation had cost him his finance job, and Tiffany had quickly moved on to more prosperous prospects. He noticed me in the produce section and, after a moment's hesitation, approached. "Dean," he began awkwardly, "I've been wanting to tell you what happened." It wasn't. I raised a hand to stop his fumbling attempt at justification or apology. "We both know exactly what happened, James. Sarah saw it coming. That's why she protected me." "I did love her," he insisted, a hint of the old defensiveness returning. "In my way." "Your way wasn't enough," I replied simply. "I forgive you because holding on to anger would only hurt me. But I don't want you in my life." As I walked away, I realized the encounter had left me feeling not anger or satisfaction, but simply peace. James no longer held power over my emotions. The first anniversary of Sarah's passing arrived on a beautiful spring day. Instead of spending it alone in grief, I invited friends, neighbors, and support group members to a garden gathering in her honor. We shared stories, planted new flowers, and celebrated the joy she had brought to all our lives, rather than focusing solely on her absence. Anna and I had grown increasingly close throughout the year. What began as neighborly support had evolved into deep friendship and, gradually, something more. At 69, I never expected to find companionship again, but Sarah's voice seemed to echo in my mind. Life continues, even after loss. The house that James had tried to take from me became more than just my home again. Parts of it were transformed into community spaces. The sunroom became a meeting place for the grief support group. The garden hosted healing gatherings and memorial services. The spare bedroom provided temporary shelter for seniors in transition. Sarah's legal foresight had not only returned my house, but had given me purpose. I began speaking at senior centers about elder rights and property protection, sharing our story to help others avoid similar situations. Today, as I sit in the garden Sarah loved, surrounded by the flowers we planted together and new ones added since, I realize the most important lesson from this painful journey. A house is made of walls and beams, but a home is made of love and dreams. James thought he was taking a building, a financial asset. He never understood that the true value was in the memories, the love, the legacy that no legal document could ever fully capture or contain. If Sarah's story and mine can help even one person protect themselves from those who would take advantage of vulnerability and grief, then some good has come from our pain. And if you're watching this from a place of similar struggle, know that you are not alone. There is hope and healing ahead, even after the deepest betrayal. What unexpected lessons have you learned from difficult times in your life? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take advantage of you or a loved one? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, the strongest houses are built not just with lumber and nails, but with wisdom earned through life's hardest storms. Thank you for listening, and may your own home always be filled with genuine love and respect.